Welcome to the Above and Beyond Recovery Podcast, where we explore recovery and its relationship to faith, family, work, community, and health. Hi, I'm Amber Didden, today's host of the Above and Beyond Recovery Podcast. On today's episode, we'll be exploring how women experience addiction. We know that men and women are different in many ways, but when it comes to addiction and recovery, what are some challenges that are unique to women, and how can our communities best support them? Our guest today is Danae Fanjoy. As many of you know, this show is produced by Pennsylvania Adult and Teen Challenge, and Danae is one of our women's counselors. So welcome to the show, Danae.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Well, Danae, I wanted to start first with just asking you how you got into the field and found yourself here at Pennsylvania Adult and Teen Challenge, how you picked this career path, and what your experience has been so far.
Well, as cliche as it might sound, I feel that this path sort of chose me rather than me choosing this path. I had went to college not really knowing what it was that I wanted to study, just knowing I needed to be in college and study something. So I had the really grand plan of just going and being undeclared, and was going to follow that path until I figured out what I wanted to do, but quickly learned that you actually don't get financial aid if you're not there studying anything in particular. So the person that I was working with was like, you know what, I'll just put you in counseling, and then when you figure it out, you can change it. And so I kind of got put there by accident, which actually ended up being really a good way for me to figure out that this is actually really kind of what I'm wired for and what I love doing. And so maybe got into it by accident, but then just never got out of it and continued to follow that career path. I did say all throughout my schooling that I will do any field, but I will never work in drug and alcohol. And so naturally, this is where I am. But it was the door that opened for me. And, you know, it is kind of one of the easier places to get into working in the field of counseling. But as I just began working with the sort of the population in this field, I found myself just really my heart broke for them. And the reason I didn't want to get into this field is because I didn't feel like I would be able to relate. That's not my background. I didn't feel like I would have anything to offer. But what I found pretty quickly was that the underlying issues of addiction are really the same as with any other life challenge. We just express them in different ways. And so that kind of became my way of being able to connect with people, was looking for the underlying issues, which is really the things that we need to be going after anyways.
Right. So you said a little bit about how like addiction was the last field you wanted to be in, and that you felt like maybe you couldn't relate. Was that the only reason why you were challenged by it, or were there other things kind of?
That was the main reason. I also, just being naive, I had my own stereotypes of what I thought it would be like to work with this population. None of those were true. I really thought that, they just wouldn't. I thought that I wouldn't be able to find a way to connect with them, and not only me connect with them, but them connect with me, and that it would kind of always be held against me of, well, you don't know what I'm going through, so who are you to try to, help me with this? But I really haven't found that to be true.
Now, have you only ever worked with women in addiction, or have you counseled men in addiction as well?
So when I first started out, I did men and women.
Did you feel like maybe you could connect on that level, at least as like a woman, a mother, and kind of start from there and build connection through that?
So actually, I found the opposite. It was more challenging to connect with women.
Really?
And what I noticed is that women tend to be threatened by other women. And so coming in, I instantly faced this kind of like wall up of like I needed to prove myself to them. Whereas I didn't find that with the men. Working with the men had its own challenges, but I was more instantly kind of welcomed into that little circle, whereas women, it took me a little bit longer to prove myself to them.
Yeah. Where do you think that wall comes from?
I think it is probably insecurity. Obviously, if someone is in a position where they're, seeking treatment, they have made some life choices that have not been the best, not the ones that they're that they would say that they're really proud of. A lot of times that might entail, losing their children, or just the different things that is specific to what women face.
One of the things that struck me the most when I started thinking about this episode, and I did a Google search on women in addiction, and the first thing that came up was that women are far less likely to get treatment than men. And I saw a couple of things about why that might be, but I kind of wanted to pick your brain about that just in your experience. Why do you think there are so many more barriers for women to actually get the help that they need?
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, just the practical matter of it, there are more treatment options, generally speaking, available for men than there are for women. I've spoken with several of my clients who said that, they at different points in their trying to seek out treatment, that it was just a matter of there wasn't a bed available. So I think that that's a big part of it. But you also have to take into consideration women might be less likely to want to leave their families and go to treatment because they might be leaving behind small children. And so what does that mean? If I leave my children, are they going to get taken into the system? What is that going to make me look like as a mother? So there may be more of trying to be a functioning, be functioning in the struggles that they're facing, so still trying to hold it together on the outside. And oftentimes it does take matters like someone actually coming and taking their children away before they can hit that proverbial rock bottom and realize, I really can't do this anymore.
Do you think that women are more stigmatized in their struggle with addiction than maybe men might be?
I do. And I think a large part of that is because, with the whole mother factor, again, when you're a mom, that's a really big part of your identity. And so if I can't mother my children, I can't take care of them, I can't support them, then what does that say about me, not only as a mom, but what does that say about me as a human being? And I do think that women tend to be, people tend to be a little bit harsher with women in that sense. It's easy for even other women to judge women. If I'm a mom and I don't have a problem taking care of my kids, it's easier for me to maybe judge someone and be like, you just need to step it up. You know what I mean? Where it's not that simple.
Right.
But I think that is some of the stigma that women face in particular.
So let's talk a little bit about motherhood and mothers in addiction. I know there are some resources for women who have children. Just in my time working in the admissions office, I know our first thing was, do you have a family member who might be able to stay with your child while you're in treatment?
Yeah.
Do you know of any other resources, and how can communities come alongside mothers who desperately need treatment and don't want to lose their kids?
It's a challenge, and I wish that I could say I knew of all these great resources, but the reality is that I don't. There are some centers that's kind of their specialization. They take women and children, but then oftentimes, they might not take women on psych meds. And so it becomes this thing of well, do I go off my medication? And not everybody's in a position where they can go off of their medication like that. So I wish that I could say that I have some good answers on that, but I think that's a real lack. And it's something that it does prevent women from seeking out treatment and not only seeking treatment, but being able to stay in treatment, because then they feel that tug of my kids aren't in a safe place, or I don't want them to go into the system. So especially,
I don't know a lot about it, but I know women who are pregnant and who are struggling with addiction have an even more difficult time finding treatment. And it's such a high risk for them and their baby. And there's so many challenges there too. And yeah, there's just a huge lack of resources for women and children. Yeah. How about special considerations for women who are trying to find treatment? What kind of differences are there in maybe treatment planning or the type of facilities they might need, or how does that look different for a men's program versus a women's program?
Sure. Well, women, just addiction in general, women face addiction in a different way than men do, simply because of our biological makeups. The hormones that we have that men don't have, addiction can really wreak havoc on just the way that our bodies are designed to function. And obviously that's true for men too. But for women in particular, things like, a lot of women lose their menstrual cycles. And while that might not sound like such a terrible thing off the bat, the reality of it is that it really does a number on hormones. And when your hormones are messed up, then that affects your mental health. And so you have to think about, if a woman is coming in, what is the process going to look like just to get her to a place where she's stable physically, where her body is now working and in balance the way that it's supposed to be. Other considerations might be, women tend to be more tender in nature than men. So as where men, it might be an easier approach that works to kind of more of a tough love, that's not always the case for women. You know, some women might respond to that, but a lot of women might need more of a tender kind of approach. I think also just being sympathetic to what they're going through. You know, if a woman just gave up her children to come work on herself for a year, we have to be really mindful of things like children's birthdays, Mother's Day, you know, holidays, all of those things that are just going to be more fragile times in nature.
One of the things you mentioned was just considering holidays and birthdays, and what kind of things do we do in our programs that help support those times of the year?
I think we do that really well here. We try to be very mindful of just the emotional process that, you know, someone would be going through. I know for Mother's Day, Jamie, the program director, planned a really lovely brunch for the ladies where they were just celebrated, you know, and even celebrated for the fact that your job as a mother is a hard job, and what you're doing right now for your children, whether they're 5, whether they're 15, 25, 35, whatever, it's meaningful and it's worth being celebrated. So just trying to make special moments, you know, out of days or occasions that might otherwise bring up a lot of shame and just allow people to kind of get in a negative headspace.
And that's something too, whether you're a man or a woman, I know holidays can be hard for people in recovery, just period, whether they're in treatment or out of treatment. And it's something that we don't always think about as maybe support people or members of the community.
Yeah.
If you have a friend or a loved one who's in recovery and you're coming up on a holiday that might be significant for them, what are some ways that we can support our friends and our loved ones?
I think primarily just being mindful of it. Everybody's going to approach those holidays differently, whereas some people might want a lot of people around them to support them. They might want the distraction. Others might just want to be left alone to be able to be with their thoughts. So being mindful and then just asking, how can I support you today? I know that today is a hard day for you. I'm thinking about you. How can I support you? I think that's a good place to start.
Yeah. I know some of those holidays, like you mentioned, Mother's Day might be difficult because of shame feelings. Are there other, like, I know Christmas can be hard for people. Why do you think that is?
Well, because of what Christmas represents in American culture, it's a lot of traditions, it's a lot of memories. And so whether that is bringing up painful things from their own childhoods, things that they, you know, Christmas was never a good time at my family, or it was always a time where just everybody was fighting or, you know, getting drunk or whatever, that's really hard. Or whether it's, you know, I thought it would look different. I thought that I would be making cookies with my kids and putting them out for Santa, and just so the kind of the loss of the grieving of what you thought that it would be.
So one of the, I don't know if it's a misconception, but one of the things I think about when I think about women specifically and the stories that I've heard, a lot of the stories I've heard of women in our program, kind of the beginning point for them in addiction was some kind of traumatic event. And I know that that's the case for men too, but in my experience, it does seem like women tend to have more trauma in their background that then leads them down this path. Has that been your experience too?
It has, yes. I don't know that I've ever worked with a female client in particular that doesn't have some kind of trauma in their background. Often it is sexual trauma. Often it's sexual trauma that happened early in childhood. You know, in a lot of ways that would make sense. Obviously, that's a very unnatural thing for a child to have to go through, and to not know what to do with the shame, the emotions, the confusion, all of that, it can lead people into, well, I just don't want to face it anymore, so I'm going to numb it, and then that cycle kind of takes on a life of its own. It often can lead people back into trauma because if someone is, you know, under the influence of substances, chances are they're putting themselves in more dangerous situations where then they're more vulnerable to be traumatized again. So yeah, it's a very ugly cycle.
And I've heard a lot about trauma-informed care recently. Can you tell us a little bit about what that means and how it works?
Yeah. So trauma-informed care is just basically understanding, being educated on how do I need to be mindful and sensitive to people that have been through trauma. And so there's certain things that I'm going to be mindful of. For an easy example is when I position my office. I'm not going to put my desk, place myself in between the door and my client, because if they have come from a situation where they've been trapped, then they're instantly going to go back to that place of I'm trapped in here. And then we're not going to get anywhere because the whole time they're so anxious about the fact that I can't get out of here and here I am again. So simple things like that. It doesn't necessarily mean doing all of the in-depth trauma work, but just being mindful of how am I going to carry and present myself in a way that's not going to constantly be re-traumatizing the individual that I'm trying to care for.
What do you think women in the recovery process would want their friends and family to know about addiction and recovery?
I love this question. I actually brought it to my clients because I thought who better to give an answer to that question than those who are actually living it. And the one thing that I heard more than anything else is that women want to be understood for where they're at right now. And so the way that they explained what that would look like is don't have unrealistic expectations. Understand that, as we were talking about, there are going to be holidays and different anniversaries that are going to be hard. And so if that day I'm a little grumpier than usual, give me some grace, Also to understand that just because I'm here and I am battling addiction and I'm working on myself, it does not mean that I'm not a good mom. It doesn't mean that I don't love my children. It doesn't mean, that I'm any less than any other woman out there. This is just my battle that I'm facing right now. And so I think just a general, kind of a support in a sense of we're going to wrap our arms around you and we're going to support you through this and not judge you, but just kind of walk alongside of you and still treat you as a human being. That's a really big part too of addiction. Really attacks self-worth and self-image. Women tend to struggle with that anyways. And so then you factor in the addiction piece and, as we were talking about, a lot of times the trauma that kind of precedes that. Oftentimes when women get to a place where they're seeking treatment, they have no concept of self-worth. And so having to rebuild that, in a really good way that we can help them do that is by just treating them as if they are valuable, as if they are not second-class citizens.
And not only are they not bad people for being in treatment or bad mothers, that takes extraordinary strength.
Absolutely.
We had our Celebrate event here, and I saw a lot of the ladies with their families and with their children, and I cannot imagine what it would be like to leave my children for that period of time, and the strength that takes, and the courage and the trust in the Lord that He's going to sustain their kids, but how necessary it is for them to take that time for themselves so that they can heal and give what they need to their children. I'm so inspired by the women that we have in our program, by the mothers we have in our program who are making the decision to pour into themselves that way so that they can be better for their families. It's just a tremendous undertaking, and I'm so proud of them.
Yeah, absolutely. It really is it's a selfless act. It might not feel like it for them at the time, but really it is.
So how about when someone completes our program, whether that's a short-term program or a long-term stay, and they're ready to go home, what kind of considerations are there for transitioning back into the home and reuniting with their family? What do women need to keep in mind and families need to keep in mind during that transition?
Just offering simple things like parenting classes. Not every woman might feel like that's something that they need, and so it wouldn't be something that's mandatory, but an option. And so how do I handle a situation where my toddler, is inconsolable because I wouldn't give him 12 Oreos, situations like that? How do I handle something like that in a calm way, not put myself in a bad situation? Because a lot of us, we have to learn that as we go, and addiction can really hinder that learning process. So we don't want to just throw them back into an environment where we all know parenting is the most stressful job on the planet, where we just throw them back in and we say, okay, figure it out, So being able to teach them ahead of time, how do you handle those difficult situations? I think also that family sessions are very helpful. It's great that they get to do phone calls, but so much more important that they can come and see their mom and see her healing, and depending on the age of the child, you would obviously kind of decide what that session would look like, but allowing them to be a part of a process in a way that's age appropriate. So we're not just separating families for a year and then expecting everything to just flow naturally when they are reunited with each other.
What would you say to a grandmother who is the guardian for a time of her grandchildren, and her daughter is coming home from treatment, and grandma's not sure if her daughter's ready to take care of her children? How would you kind of coach the grandmother to feel comfortable with, or what should she be looking for, or how does she figure out when it's time to kind of let that happen?
Yeah. Communication is huge, and in a situation like that, why it would be absolutely necessary to have had family sessions all throughout the way and begin that conversation well before we even get to that point of what is this going to look like and what boundaries are going to be in place and what will the consequences be, if something is violated, what's it going to look like. One of the really big challenges that I hear my clients face is when they do entrust their children to, particularly another family member, the different parenting styles. So is where, the client might have been very authoritative, the grandmother maybe lets the child do whatever they want, and so there's a conflict there, but at the same time, the grandma's taking care of the child, so that's almost like, well, can I really say anything? I should just be grateful. And so all of those details are going to need to be communicated about on and on and on until they get to a place where we now have something that, it functions for us.
So what would you, if you could think back, are there any success stories that come to mind of women that maybe you've worked with, and where they're at now and kind of the growth and change you've seen?
By far the best part of my job is getting to see the success stories. That's what makes it worth it. And I've been very blessed to get to be a part of people's journeys that they come in and they're very broken, have, no self-esteem whatsoever, have really allowed their pain and the world just to kind of define them. And a lot of times when people are in that place, they either don't have a relationship with God or they have resentments against God. And that's not something that you can force to heal. That's something where you just kind of have to meet someone where they're at. And, when they're open, you give them some words of encouragement, but also when they're not, like, you gotta just be with them where they're at. But to see, as you just love people where they are, the healing place wants to happen naturally. There's very little that we have to do to kind of make room for that healing to happen. Just loving people where they're at, being consistent, walking alongside of them, that's really the magical ingredients. And so I have been very blessed to kind of see people come full circle, go through our program, and as they graduate our program, not only have a new identity, but have now a calling. They know they're sure of their purpose in life, and they're now going after the goals that they have. And so many women, when they come through this process, they want to turn around and help other women that are struggling with it. So it's really a beautiful thing to kind of get to sit back and take in.
Yeah. I know we see women who come in on day one, and then we see them on their last day when they're going home or moving on to the next stage in their life. And just the hope that gives me to see that happen. It's so easy to get discouraged about what's happening in the world and what's happening just with the epidemic of addiction right now. But there is absolutely hope for people who are struggling, and thank you so much for sharing that hope with us. Yeah. Before we close the show, we like to talk about the habits that we're making this week that help us find wholeness in our lives. Danae, what's your wholeness habit of the week?
Well, my wholeness habit is one that I think I'm forever trying to work on, but really trying to focus on more this week, is just putting aside my distractions. Mostly that's my phone, whether that's email, social media, text messaging, and just be present in the moment. So for me, a lot of times that looks like just focusing on my kids and, watching what they're doing and just taking in the moments with them.
Yeah, I feel like that's so hard. Like, how do you get yourself out of a moment and remind yourself, like, wait, I need to be here right now?
Yeah, it's very difficult, especially because a lot of times the distractions are just that. We want to be distracted from whether it's our kids screaming or, telling us the same knock-knock joke for the 50th time. So, but to have that discipline to be present, I feel like I never regret it. I do regret the time that I waste on my phone or, the other distractions that I have. So
yeah, that's so good. Yeah. Well, my wholeness habit this week is right behind me. So I've been drinking one of these a day. And I've recently been inspired to try to do 2 of them a day. So I do feel like, as cliche as it sounds, drinking water is so good for you, and it does make me feel so much better. So I'm gonna try to get 2 of those down this week every day. And that's it for this week. Danae, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And to those of you listening, don't forget to leave us a comment or email us with your questions at AboveBeyond@paatc.org. We're looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you for joining us. The Above and Beyond Recovery Podcast is a production of Pennsylvania Adult and Teen Challenge. If you or a loved one needs help with addiction, call us now at 844-888-8085 or find us online at paatc.org. That information is also in our show notes. Join us next time as we continue the conversation.